The gate agent called my row twice before I stood up. One-way ticket to Manila on my phone, the divorce papers folded in my jacket like they still meant something. 63 years old, 31 years married, and I couldn't get the ring off my finger. Everyone said I'd lost my mind. My own daughter thought some stranger was after my money. The house was already sold. My half was gone. $1,800 a month and a savings account I was scared to open. I told myself I was going somewhere. The truth is, I was running out of country. Before I take you the rest of the way into this, do me one small favor. If you're the kind of person who wants to hear how a thing like this actually turns out, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because it helps an old man's story reach other people who might need to hear it. And stick around to the end. I want to know in the comments whether you'd have done what I did. All right, let me tell it straight. I'm getting ahead of myself. That's what my daughter would say. Dale, slow down. Start at the beginning. So let me back up, because that morning at the airport wasn't the start of anything. It was the end of a long slide, and the slide started in a kitchen about 14 months before, on a Tuesday over coffee. Carol put her mug down and said she was done. Not angry. That's the part that still gets me. If she'd thrown something, I'd have understood it. Instead, she said it the way you'd tell somebody the milk had gone off. 31 years, and she said done. And then she asked if I wanted the last of the coffee before she rinsed the pot. I said no. I've thought since that I should have said yes, just to keep her standing there another minute. But I said no, and she rinsed it, and that was the marriage. I was an electrician. 34 years of it. The last 10 running my own little outfit, me and a kid named Marty, and a van that smelled like soda. I was good. I want you to know that, because most of what comes next makes me sound like a fool, and I wasn't always one. You hand me something that doesn't work, I find the fault. That's how my head is wired, fixable or not fixable. That's the only two piles I've got. But you can't put a marriage on the bench and check it with a meter. I didn't know that yet. I spent about a year after Carol left me thinking there was a fault I could find if I just kept at it. I retired at 61 because my knees quit and my shoulder went, and retirement is where a man like me goes to disappear. I woke up at 5:40 every day out of habit, for a job I didn't have. I made coffee for 2 out of habit, for a woman who wasn't there, and then I'd stand at the counter looking at the second cup like it had shown up on its own. I reorganized my toolbox. God, I reorganized that toolbox. You could have done surgery off the tray. Nobody needed a single thing in it. I watched a lot of television I couldn't tell you one word about. There was a diner I'd gone to for years, the same booth, and the girl who worked the counter used to know my order before I sat down. 2 eggs, wheat toast, coffee black. After Carol left, that girl moved on and a new one started, and she didn't know me from a fence post, and I never told her my order. I just pointed at the menu like a tourist in my own town. That's a small thing, but I'd sit in that booth some mornings and understand that I could get up and walk out, and nobody would give the empty seat a second look. The house got quiet in a way a house isn't supposed to. I stopped answering the door. I let the grass go a week too long, then 2. A man can disappear a little at a time and never once decide to. Then the money came apart, and that was the one I didn't see coming, because I'm supposed to be the practical one. The house sold fine, but there was a refinance on it from 8 years back, and that refinance was mine. Carol had wanted to open a little shop, candles and cards and I don't know what, and I pulled the money out of the house to give her that, because I loved her and because I wanted to be the guy who could give it. The shop closed in 19 months. The debt didn't close. By the time the lawyers took their cut and the bank took theirs and we split what was left, my half of 31 years came to about $40,000 and a Social Security check. I never told Beth the refinance was my idea. She thinks Carol talked me into it. I let her think that. A man's got to keep 1 or 2 things. Beth's my daughter, 34, lives down in Columbus, Married to Tom. 2 little ones, Tyler and Grace. She's a good girl and she was scared, and scared people get bossy. She started with the mail, said Dad. You're missing bills. Let me have them forwarded to me. I'll just keep an eye. Then it was, why don't you come stay in the basement? Tom finished it. There's a bathroom and everything. Then, one night on the phone, careful, like she was handling something that might go off, she said there was a nice senior apartment near them, still had a unit open. They do your meals. I heard one word out of that whole sentence. Dependent. I know now she wasn't being cruel. Her grandfather, my dad, got taken by one of those phone men near the end, the ones who call and say your grandson's in jail. He wired them everything he had and died about broke and ashamed. And Beth was 17 when it happened, and it marked her. She looks at me and sees him. I understand that better now than I did then. Then I just heard a girl I'd taught to ride a bike telling me where I'd be eating dinner for the rest of my life. What I found out later was that she'd started keeping screenshots. Anything I said about money, she had a little folder. I didn't know that yet either. The Philippines came in sideways, the way these things do. Roy Mercer. He was my foreman on the big commercial jobs back in the 90s, hard old bird, retired somewhere out there 2 years before. He put a photo in a group text one night, him on a bench by the water, palm trees, a plate of something in front of him, and he wrote under it, $40 pension day, king for a week. Everybody laughed with the thumbs. I didn't laugh. I sat up. I did the math. That's the thing about a man who spent his life pricing jobs. I ran the numbers on Roy's little joke, and I couldn't make them stop looking good. I messaged him off to the side. He wrote back for 2 hours. Rent, food, a beer, a doctor. He said his whole nut was less than my property taxes used to be. That started the searches. 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, the phone lighting up my face. Apartments with tile floors and ceiling fans. Videos of a place called Dumaguete. Some fellow walking a seafront with a coffee, saying everybody there called it the city of gentle people. Forums full of men my age arguing about visas. And every good thing I found came with a bad thing bolted to it, and I made myself look at both. Cheap, yes, but 8,000 miles from Tyler and Grace. Warm all year, which my knees like the sound of, but storms come through, and the power goes, and the heat is a real thing, not a postcard. There was a good hospital there, a university one, people seemed to trust it, but my blood pressure had been up, and my father dropped at 68, and I kept thinking, what happens if my chest goes wrong at 3 in the morning in a country where I don't know a soul but Roy? That one I couldn't answer. I wrote it down and I looked at it and I bought the ticket anyway. That's the part I can't dress up. I bought a one-way ticket before I told anybody. I signed a 6-month lease on an apartment I'd only seen in 4 photographs because Roy said the building was fine and I trusted a man I hadn't stood next to in 15 years over my own daughter. Maybe I was being stubborn. Maybe stubborn is too kind a word for it. I told Beth on a video call after it was done. I'd practiced it. Practicing didn't help. You bought the ticket already, she said. Not a question. I did. To the Philippines. She said the word like it tasted wrong. Dad, what happens if you get sick? Who's there? Who takes you to the hospital, Roy? Roy had a stroke. I didn't know Roy had had a stroke. He hadn't led with that. I'll figure it out, I said, which is a thing you say when you haven't. You barely leave the house here. Now you're gonna... She stopped. She started again lower. Is there somebody there? Some woman? Is that what this is? There wasn't. I want that on the record because of everything that came after. There was no woman. I was going for the arithmetic and the shame of the basement, and that was all. But she'd said it, and it sat in the room after, and I'd think about that question a lot in the months to come. There's no woman, I said. I'm not asking permission, Beth. I'm telling you, so you're not surprised. She cried a little. I let her. I didn't win that call. You don't win those. You just get to the end of them. The morning I left, I couldn't get the ring off. 31 years, and my knuckle had grown over it, and I stood at the sink running cold water and soap over my own hand like an idiot, and it wouldn't go. In the end, I left it on. Simpler. That's what I told myself. Nobody came to the airport. I don't know what I expected. I read Beth's last text about 4 times at the gate. Please just be careful. Please answer when I call. And I didn't write back because I didn't trust what would come out. Then they called my row the second time, and I stood up. The flying, I'll spare you. It's a long way, and my knees hated all of it. And somewhere over the ocean, I stopped being able to tell what day it was. Manila hit me first as a wall of wet air the second the plane door opened, and then as noise, and then as a terminal so bright and so full that I stood still and got bumped twice before I moved. I had a domestic flight to catch to Dumaguete, a little more than an hour further south, and I spent most of the layover clutching my bag like somebody was going to take it, because that's the state I was in. Roy was supposed to meet me at the other end. He wasn't there. I stood outside that small airport in the heat with my one cracked-wheeled suitcase, watching everybody get met but me, and I thought, well, Beth, you were right. First day, here it is. Then a young guy came up, 40 maybe, in a faded shirt, and said my name. Dale, Sir Dale. Roy had sent him. Nilo, he said, tapping his own chest. He drove one of those little motorcycle and sidecar rigs, a tricycle, and he told me Roy wasn't feeling strong today and didn't want me stranded. He said it plain, no drama, already lifting my bag before I'd decided to trust him. I want to tell you I felt relief. Mostly I felt watched and cheap and far from home. I climbed into that little sidecar with my knees up around my ears, and Nilo pulled us out into traffic I didn't have words for, horns and bikes, and a warm smell of smoke and cooking, and I held my suitcase on my lap the whole way like it was the last thing I owned. Which, in a manner of speaking, it was. We got to the building near dark. Nilo cut the engine and looked up at it and didn't say anything, which told me plenty. The 4 photographs hadn't lied exactly. They'd just been taken by somebody kind. The place was up a flight of stairs my knees announced their opinion of, the paint was going, and when the landlord's boy let me in and I flipped the switch, half the lights came up and the other half didn't, and the ceiling fan turned about as fast as a man stirring soup. I stood in the doorway of the apartment I'd signed 6 months of my life to, sight unseen, 8,000 miles from my grandchildren, ring still stuck on my finger, and Nilo said quiet behind me, "It's okay, Sir Dale. We fix." I didn't answer him. I was doing the math again, and this time the math was looking back at me. Nilo didn't leave right away. I'll give him that. He stood in my doorway while I walked the 2 rooms of my new life, and when I came back to the front he was still there, and he said again, "We fix," and pointed at the dead lights like it was already settled. I told him I was an electrician. He didn't believe me at first. Then he grinned and said, "So you fix?" And something in me that had been clenched for a day and a half let go about a quarter turn. That first night, I didn't sleep. The fan pushed the hot air around without cooling it. Around 2, the power went out entirely. I learned the word for it later, brownout. Like the whole city just dimmed for a while. And I lay there in the dark, listening to a rooster that had its clock set wrong and dogs answering each other across the town. And I thought about my bed in Toledo, the good mattress, the one thing in the divorce I hadn't fought for, $40,000 and a Social Security check. I set it to the ceiling like a prayer I didn't believe. Morning was better. Morning usually is. I went out to find coffee and got my first real look at the place in daylight. And I'll tell you what I noticed, because it wasn't the palm trees. It was that people looked at me and then looked away polite, no hustle, and that a woman sweeping her steps said good morning to a stranger like it cost her nothing. I found the seafront the videos had shown, this long boulevard by the water with old trees, and I sat on a bench with a coffee that cost me almost nothing and watched tricycles go by 3 deep and felt for about 10 minutes like maybe I'd done something clever instead of something crazy. Then the 10 minutes ended, because they always did, and the fear came back in with the heat. I want to be honest about the money, because the money is the whole spine of this thing. The rent on that apartment was a fraction of what I'd paid to keep the lights on in Ohio. Food at the little eateries, carinderias they call them, a steam table and plastic chairs, was pocket change. My check landed in my American bank the way it always had, and I pulled cash out of a machine that charged me a fee and gave me a fat, useless-feeling stack of pesos. On paper, I was fine. Better than fine. But the 40,000 sat in that savings account like a life raft, and I made myself a promise that first week, I do not touch it. That's the emergency. That's the hospital. The flight home if I have to. The thing between me and the basement. Rent and food come out of the check. The raft does not get touched. I want you to remember I said that. There was a visa thing too, right away. I'd come in on the stamp they give Americans at the airport 30 days. And I found out quick that if I wanted to stay, I had to go downtown to an immigration office and pay to extend it, and then do it again, and again, on and on. First time I did it, I stood in a warm room full of other foreigners and locals with folders, and a woman behind a counter was patient with me while I filled out the wrong form and then the right one, and I paid, and I walked out with a stamp that bought me a couple more months of being allowed to exist here. Small thing. But every time I'd have to do it, that same little question would tap me on the shoulder. How long can you actually keep this up? Can you even stay? Roy. I finally saw on day 3. He came to me, since I didn't know how to get anywhere yet, and it knocked the wind out of me a little. In my head, he was still the barrel-chested foreman who could scare a job into finishing on time. What came up my stairs was a thinner, slower man. One side of his face not quite keeping up with the other. A cane he was still getting used to. The stroke. He waved off my face when he saw it. "Don't," he said. I hate that look. We sat. He was straight with me, which I hadn't expected and needed. He told me his own money was tighter than his group text made it sound. He told me the woman he lived with, Perla, did more for him than he liked to admit, and that without her he'd have gone home already, if there was still a home to go to. "This place doesn't fix you, Dale," he said. "You get that? Whatever you brought, you brought." He tapped his own bad arm. "I brought this. It followed me right onto the plane." I hadn't wanted to hear that. I'd flown 8,000 miles, partly to get away from people telling me hard, true things, but it settled something. I stopped waiting for the country to do the work. The warmth, when it came from downstairs. There was a little store built into the front of my building, one of those sorry stores. A window with cigarettes and candy and shampoo in tiny packets, run by a widow named Lorna. 50s, sharp-eyed, quick to laugh at you. 3 grown kids, one of them off working in Dubai and wiring money home. The first week she just watched me. Second week she started saying my name. Third week she noticed I ate alone every night, the same tired plate from the same eatery. And one evening she sent her helper up the stairs with a covered bowl of something with ginger in it, still hot, and no bill. I tried to pay. She wouldn't take it. She said something I didn't catch and flapped her hand at me. I stood in my doorway with a warm bowl in my hands and I got embarrassingly close to losing it, and I want to be clear about why, because it wasn't the soup. It was that somebody had noticed I was there. Back home, I could go a week without a soul saying my name that wasn't on the phone asking about my mail. She noticed me. That's a small thing to break a grown man, and it half broke me. I don't want to make her a saint. She'd also short you on change if you weren't watching and then cackle when you caught it. She had opinions about everybody on the street and shared them freely. She was a person, is what I'm saying, not an angel sent to teach the sad American a lesson. But she saw me. And after a year of being invisible, being seen does something. I paid her back the only way I had. Her store light flickered. Bad connection in the box. I could see it from across the room. And one afternoon, I asked could I look, and she shrugged like humor me, and I opened it up and found the fault in about 4 minutes and fixed it in 10. When the light came up steady, she went quiet, then loud. Then she was telling everyone on the street the American fixed her light. And by the next week, 2 other people had asked me to look at things. I fixed a fan. I fixed a pump. I wasn't charging. I didn't want their money. I wanted the thing I got when the fault came clear, and the machine ran right, and somebody looked at me like I was worth having around. Getting around took me a while, and Nilo was the one who taught me. He'd point out which tricycles ran, which routes, what a fair fare was, when I was getting charged the foreigner price and should just laugh and pay the extra 10 pesos anyway because it wasn't worth the fight. First week on my own, I got turned around 3 streets from my own building and had to call him. And he came and found me and didn't say a word about it, just clapped me on the shoulder and drove me the long way so I'd learn the landmarks. At the market, I found out the hard way that you don't take the first price. A woman selling fish quoted me something and I paid it flat, no argument. And the vendor at the next stall laughed and told me in English that I just made that lady's whole morning. I felt like an idiot. So I went back the next day and haggled badly. And the same fish lady called me boss and knocked off 20 pesos. And I walked home feeling like I'd passed a test nobody told me I was taking. My coffee started to change too, and I only noticed it later. In Toledo, it was 2 cups in a silent kitchen. Here it was, 1 cup on the front step, and Lorna opening the store, and Nilo going by with a wave, and a kid on the way to school. Same coffee, different life around it. Lorna is how I met Ada. She came by the store one afternoon to buy load for her phone. And Lorna introduced us the way she introduced everybody. Half a compliment and half a joke. This is Dale. He fixes things. He's sad, but he's useful. Ada was 51, a retired public school teacher, a widow. She tutored kids at a little learning center a few streets over, math and English, and she had a way of looking at you like she was already grading you. Her husband had died of a stroke some years back. She had a grown son, Marlon, working in Cebu. We did not have a moment. I want to be honest about that too, because these stories always have a moment, and this wasn't one. She corrected my Tagalog attempt, which was terrible, and when I got a little defensive about it, she raised an eyebrow and said, "Teachers don't stop being teachers." And Lorna laughed at me, and I left a bit stung. That was it. But I thought about her walking home. Not romantically, not yet. I thought, there's a woman who wouldn't put up with an ounce of nonsense. And after Carol, who'd left me so gently it felt like being erased, a little sharpness was almost a relief. Beth called that same week, and the call went bad. She'd been reading. That folder of hers, filling up. She'd found the stories. Old men out here handing their pensions to women half their age, wiring their savings off, ending up broke and stranded. "I'm not saying you," she said in the way that means she was saying me. "I'm just saying it happens, all the time, to exactly men like you." "Men like me," I said. "Lonely, new there, don't know how it works." She wasn't wrong about a single one of those. That's what made it land. "Dad, has anyone asked you for anything? Money? Anyone?" "No," I said. And it was true. And I was already annoyed enough that I didn't tell her about the soup or the light or Ada or any of it, because I knew how she'd read it. Kindness would go straight into the folder as a red flag. So I told her nothing, and she heard the nothing, and I heard her hear it. "That senior place is still open," she said before we hung up. Safety net and threat, both, in one sentence. Just so you know. I found out much later she was screenshotting the calls too, or the notes from them. Dad won't say who his friends are. Dad's being cagey about money, building her case. I didn't know that yet. But I knew enough to start telling her less. And telling somebody less is how the gap opens up, the dangerous gap, between what your family thinks is happening and what actually is. I dug that gap myself one careful phone call at a time. By the second month, I'd made a decision. The apartment with the half-dead lights and the stairs my knees hated wasn't going to work, and staying in it out of pride was going to cost me my mood and maybe my health. Lorna knew of a place, and Ada knew the landlord, and between them I found a small apartment closer to the center, ground floor, a real ceiling fan, a little balcony that caught what breeze there was. I signed the lease. I bought a bed, a table, 2 chairs, a coffee pot. And there it went. The first real bite out of the raft. A few $100s I'd sworn I wouldn't touch, gone to sheets and a mattress, and a fan that actually turned. I told myself furniture wasn't the emergency. I told myself a man has to sleep. Both of those were true, and neither of them was the whole truth. Which was that I was settling in, digging in, spending like a man who intended to stay. The night I moved in, Ada came by with the Learning Center's little troop to help carry things, 4 or 5 kids and a couple of the other tutors. And afterward, they sat on my new balcony drinking soda, and Ida told me the center was always short. Short on money, short on supplies. The fans, half of them broken, so the kids sweated through their lessons. She wasn't asking. I want to be exact about that, because of everything that came after. She was complaining, the way you complain about work. She wasn't asking me for one thing. But I heard need, and need is the one sound I can't walk away from. Before they left, I told her I'd come look at the fans. And then, standing at my own door with my new life half unpacked around me, I said I'd cover the parts, whatever it came to, don't worry about it. She looked at me a second too long. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," I said. "I want to." I could see Beth's folder in my head when I said it. I sent the money for the parts anyway, the first transfer. Small, nothing really. That's how it starts. Not with a con. With a man who needs to be needed, writing a check nobody asked him to write, and feeling more alive doing it than he'd felt in 2 years. I'll stop here for just a second, because this is the part where it starts to turn, and I'd hate for you to miss the rest. If any of this is landing with you, if you know what it's like to be written off, or to love somebody who's making a decision everybody around them thinks is crazy, then like this video and subscribe so the next chapter finds you. And tell me in the comments, at this point in the story, do you think I was a fool, or do you think I was finally waking up? I read them. Now let me tell you what the money really cost me. The fans were only the start of it, and I knew they were only the start even while I was buying them. You fix one thing at a place like that and you see the next thing and the next. The wiring in that learning center was a fire waiting for a slow afternoon. Somebody had run extension cords over extension cords, taped into a box that had no business carrying that load, and every time the kids plugged in the second-hand computers, the lights browned like the building was holding its breath. I couldn't unsee it. So I told Ada I'd rewire the front room properly, and I did over about 2 weeks, on my own knees on that concrete floor, and it was the best I'd felt since Marty and the van. Ida and I got easy with each other in those weeks, and I'll tell you, it was nothing like the movies. We argued. She thought I gave things away too fast, and she told me so. When I tried to pay for a load of proper cable out of my own pocket, she planted herself in the doorway of the hardware store and said the center would pay its share or I could take the cable home. I said I could afford it. She said that wasn't the point. The point was that a place that only ever takes turns into a place that can't stand on its own. And did I want to help them, or did I want to feel helpful? That stopped me cold, because it was the truest thing anybody had said to me since Roy's stroke line. She cooked for me some nights, and she was a decent cook, and a worse one than she thought. And I never told her that, which is maybe the closest thing to love I'd felt in years. Keeping my mouth shut about the dry chicken. She took me to a fiesta in her old barangay once. Her whole extended family under a tarp, plastic chairs, a karaoke machine somebody's cousin would not surrender for love or money. I understood about one word in 10. But Ida sat me next to her uncle, an old man who'd spent 40 years as a machinist. And the two of us worked out we could talk with our hands, drawing parts in the air, and we sat there half the afternoon with no language between us and understood each other fine. On the walk home, she told me her uncle hadn't said that much to anybody in a year. I thought about my diner back home, the booth, the empty seat nobody noticed. I didn't say anything about it, but something in my chest that had been sitting wrong for 2 years shifted a quarter inch, the way a fuse finally seats in the socket and the light comes on. Then Marlon's boy got sick. Ida's son, down in Cebu, has a little one, 4 years old. The child spiked a fever that wouldn't come down and then couldn't keep water, and they took him in, and it turned into a hospital stay. Days of it. Tests. The kind of bill that lands on a young call center father like a dropped engine. Ada went quiet for 2 days. I could see it on her, the way you can see when someone's carrying a weight and not saying. I got it out of her over cold coffee on my balcony. The hospital wanted a deposit before they keep going, the way they do out here, money up front. And Marlon was scrambling, borrowing in pieces from everyone he knew, and it wasn't coming together fast enough. I said I'd cover it. She said, no, I want that on the record, the same way I put the missing woman on the record back at the start. She said, no, Dale, absolutely not. This is my family. This isn't your problem. She said it 3 or 4 different ways and meant it every time. And I sat there and pushed, because a sick 4-year-old is the exact shape of a thing I can't leave alone, and because, I'll be honest, because being the man who could fix this was a drug I'd been off of for 2 years and had just gotten a taste of again. I told her a child in a hospital was everybody's problem. I told her I had it, and it would sit in a bank doing nothing otherwise. Which was a lie. It wasn't doing nothing, it was the raft. I wore her down. She finally agreed, and even then she made me write it as a loan, made me watch her write it in a little notebook. The amount, the date, to be repaid, her handwriting, a teacher's handwriting. I sent it that afternoon. A few $1,000s straight off the raft. Real money now, not a fan, not a spool of cable. Nearly 1/10 of everything I had left in the world, gone in a transfer to a hospital in a city I'd never been to for a boy I'd never met. The child got better. That part matters to me. Whatever came after, the child got better. Beth found out about 11 days later. I still don't know exactly how. I think I'd left her on one of the old joint accounts we never fully untangled, and she saw the outgoing wire. Or she saw the balance drop and asked, and I didn't lie fast enough. What I remember is the call. Not the words at first, just the pitch of her voice, up in a register I hadn't heard since she was a teenager, scared of something in the dark. How much have you sent her? Not a question. Dad, how much? I tried to explain the child, the fever, the deposit, and every word I said was landing in that folder of hers as evidence. It's a loan, I said. She wrote it down. She didn't even want... Of course she wrote it down. She was crying and furious both. That's what they do, Dad. They write it down so you think it's real. Do you hear yourself? A sick kid? A hospital. Hurry. Wire it now. That is the story. That is exactly the story every single time. It's the oldest one there is. And here's the part I'm least proud of. For one long second, I didn't defend Ada, because for one long second, I wasn't sure. My daughter had just recited my own life back to me in the shape of a scam, and it fit. It fit close enough that I couldn't find the daylight. And I sat there on my balcony with the phone hot against my face and thought, what if the sharp widow who wouldn't take my money was the smartest one of all, the one who knew exactly how to make me insist? I said nothing for a second too long. Ada wasn't on the call. But I've always felt she'd have heard that silence if she'd been there, and it would have been the worst thing I did to her. I have to go, I told Beth, and I hung up on my own child, and I sat in the dark and doubted a woman who'd tried 4 times to say no to me. What broke the doubt wasn't Ada defending herself. She never did. She didn't know Beth thought she was a thief, and I never told her, and I'm not proud of that either. What broke it was small, and it was mine to see. She started paying me back. Out of tutoring money, which is nothing, a few hundred pesos at a time, and every time she'd pull that notebook out and write it down and make me initial it. And I'd tell her to stop, forget it, and she'd look at me like I'd insulted her mother. Then Marlon came up from Cebu one weekend to thank me in person, awkward as a young man is when an old foreigner has paid his son's hospital bill, and there was a moment at dinner, I felt it, where the whole table shifted toward the idea of me as the family's American, the one who could be leaned on, the well that doesn't run dry. Ada felt it too. She saw it start, and she shut it down at her own table, in her own language, sharp, and Marlon looked at his plate. And afterward, she told me plainly, "You helped once, you chose it. That's finished. You are not an account." I said a line, and she'd already said it harder than I would have. That's when I stopped doubting her. Not a grand gesture. A woman guarding my wallet against her own family, with nothing in it for her. The trouble is, by then the raft was low, and my body picked that exact month to send its bill. It started as what I told myself was indigestion. A tightness, up under the breastbone that I blamed on the food, on the heat, on getting old. It went away. Then a week later it didn't go away, and it came with a cold sweat and a left arm that felt wrong. And I still, God help me, sat on the edge of my bed for 20 minutes telling myself it would pass, because going to a hospital cost money and admitting weakness cost something I valued even more. My father's face was in that room with me. 68, the kitchen floor, gone before the ambulance. I called Nilo. I don't know why him and not Ada first. Pride, maybe, wanting the one who wouldn't fuss. Nilo had the tricycle at my door in 6 minutes and didn't say a word about the hour, just got me in and drove like he was angry at the road. And somewhere on the way, he called Ada himself, because he was smarter than me. They took me into the university hospital and it moved fast, wires and a mask, and a young doctor with steady hands. And I'll spare you the part where I was more scared than I've ever been, lying on a table 8,000 miles from my grandchildren thinking this is it. This is the thing Beth warned me about. She was right. She was right all along. It was my heart. Not the massive kind that takes you on the kitchen floor. A warning, they said. A serious one. An artery that meant business. And they did a procedure to open it up. And they told me plainly it could have gone the other way if I'd waited much longer on that bed. They needed a deposit before some of it, of course they did. And I lay there and gave them the card to the raft and watched the number that was supposed to save me from the basement drain into a hospital instead. But here's the thing Beth's folder never had a page for. I was not alone. Ada stayed. 2 nights in a plastic chair beside my bed, going home only to shower, back before I woke. Lorna closed her store an hour early and came with food I could actually eat and bossed the nurses like they were her own kids. Nilo ferried people back and forth for free and wouldn't hear otherwise. The other tutors from the center came by. A woman from down my street I'd fixed a pump for sent a message asking when I'd be home. The exact emergency my daughter had used to prove I'd be abandoned out here. The 3 a.m. Chest, the foreign hospital, no one to call. Happened, and the room filled up with people who had every reason to be somewhere else and chose to be there instead. I called Beth from that hospital bed because she deserved to hear it from me and not from silence. Middle of the night, her time. She answered on the first ring like she'd been sleeping with the phone in her hand, and when I told her, she went to pieces, and then she did a thing I didn't expect. She didn't say, "I told you so." She said, "Who's with you right now?" And I looked around that little room, at Ada asleep in the plastic chair, at the container of food Lorna had left, and I told her the truth. There are people with me. And my daughter, who'd built an entire case out of my loneliness, went quiet on the line and I heard it land. The one fact her folder couldn't hold. She booked a flight before we hung up. Coming to bring me home, she said, and I heard both halves of it. The love and the leash. Coming to see for herself. I got out after a few days, lighter in the chest and a lot lighter in the bank. The raft was down to something that scared me to look at. I was on pills now, morning and night. In a little plastic organizer Ada bought me and filled the first week like I couldn't be trusted, which I couldn't. I couldn't afford to go home even if I wanted to, and I couldn't be sure I could afford to stay. And my daughter was getting on a plane to look at the wreckage and decide what to do with me. The first week home from that hospital was the lowest I'd been since the kitchen with Carol. I couldn't lift anything, couldn't climb the 2 steps to the balcony without stopping halfway, and I hated every second of needing a hand to do it. Ada changed the dressing on my wrist where the line had gone in and told me to quit wincing. I'd had worse. Lorna sent up food I had no appetite for and stood over me until I ate it anyway. There's a particular shame in being a man who fixes things for a living and can't carry his own groceries up a flight of stairs, and I sat in that shame for days. Then one morning I took the cover off the toaster that had been tripping the outlet and fixed it one-handed badly, sitting down, and I felt like a person again for about an hour. That's all it took. An hour. The ring came off in the hospital. My hands had swelled from the fluids they ran into me, and then when the swelling went down it just moved, for the first time in over a year, loose on my finger. I could have left it. I took it off instead. Sat on the edge of the bed with it in my palm, this circle I hadn't been able to shift since before Carol rinsed out the coffee pot, and I put it in the drawer of the little table beside the bed and closed the drawer. I didn't say anything about it to anyone. I didn't make it mean anything out loud. Then I started cleaning the apartment because Beth was coming, and I was terrified of what she'd see. I cleaned that apartment like I could scrub the last 14 months off it. I got down on my bad knees and went after the grout. I bought a second good fan I couldn't afford so she wouldn't feel the heat the way I'd felt it that first night. I made Nilo promise to be at the airport early and drive slow and not tell her about the time he drove me in like the road owed him money. I asked Lorna, please, don't tell my daughter every opinion you have about me, not all of them, not the first day. Lorna said she would make no such promise and laughed at me. I even caught myself rehearsing sentences on the balcony, out loud, like a man practicing for a job interview to keep his own life. I was scared she'd walk in and see exactly what she'd been telling herself for a year. A broke old man in a hot little rented room, a heart that had already tried to quit on him once, a savings account nearly gone, a woman around who my family had decided was a thief. Put like that, in her handwriting, in that folder, it's not a crazy case. That's what I was cleaning against, not dust, the case. She came off the plane gray with exhaustion and looking at everything sideways, the way you do when you've flown 30 hours, braced for the worst. First day was hard. She clocked the traffic on the way in, the horns, the heat that hits you like a wet towel. The power went out that first evening, of course it did, and I watched her face do the math. No air conditioning, my father in this, with his heart. She met Ada that first night and was cool as a closed door, polite the way you're polite to somebody you've already decided about. She saw the little apartment, and I watched her count the rooms, and I knew what she was counting them against, the house I'd raised her in. I didn't argue with any of it. I'd learned that much. I just let the days go by and let her see. She saw the hospital, met the young doctor who'd opened up my artery, watched him explain what had happened and what I'd take from now on. And I saw her rational fears start to come loose from their moorings, because the man was good and the place was clean, and it plainly wasn't the back room she'd imagined. She sat down with me and my actual numbers, the rent, the food, the check, and she went quiet. Because on paper the daily life was cheaper and steadier than anything I could have had near her in Ohio. The senior apartment with the meals would have cost more than everything I spent here in a month. She didn't say that, but she stopped bringing up the senior apartment, and I noticed. None of that was what turned her, though. Facts don't turn people. I know that now. What turned her happened on a Wednesday, walking to the market. We went to get fish and vegetables, her and me, and it took us the better part of an hour to go 4 streets because everybody stopped me. Lorna, from her window, saving me the good eggs she'd put aside. A man whose pump I'd fixed, asking after my chest, actually asking, waiting for the answer. 2 of the tutors. And then a boy from the learning center, maybe 9, came flying across the road and grabbed my arm and started telling me, fast, that the fans I'd put in were working and his classroom wasn't hot anymore, and could I come see, and he called me Sir Dale, and he wouldn't let go of my sleeve. Beth stood off to the side of all this, holding a bag of tomatoes, watching her father get stopped every 20 feet by people who knew his name and wanted him to stay a minute longer. That was it. No speech. Nobody clapped. My daughter just watched a whole street of people be glad I existed, and she'd flown across the world carrying a folder that proved I was alone, and the folder was wrong, and she could see with her own eyes that it was wrong. That night she was different, quieter. She'd met Ada 3 times by then, and something in the set of her shoulders had eased, and the 2 of them ended up on the balcony after I went to lie down, and I don't know all of what was said out there. I know Ada didn't perform for her. I know at some point that notebook came out. The loan, the repayments, the teacher's handwriting, the initials. And Beth looked at a record of a woman paying back an old fool who kept telling her not to. She told me later, near the end of the visit, sitting on my bed. She could have just taken it, Beth said. You'd have let her. You wanted to. She turned my pill organizer over in her hands. She's the one keeping track so nobody can say she did. And that was as close as my daughter came to an apology, and it was enough. I didn't need her to like Ada. She just needed to stop being afraid of her. There was one afternoon I wasn't there for, and I only heard about it later from Lorna, who hears about everything and keeps none of it to herself. Beth had gone down to the store for water and gotten to talking, and Lorna told my daughter flat out that in the beginning she'd wondered about Ada too. Wondered if the quiet teacher was working an angle on the lonely American. And then she told Beth what changed her mind. The notebook, the fish Ada brought when I was in the hospital, and the day Ada chewed me out in front of the whole street for giving away a fan I couldn't afford. Coming from me, Beth would have heard an excuse. Coming from Lorna, a stranger with nothing to sell her and no reason to lie, it landed different. I didn't know a word of that conversation had happened until we were standing at the airport saying goodbye. We had the real talk her last night. I finally told her about the refinance, that it was mine, that I'd pulled the money out of the house for Carol's shop, that I'd let her blame her mother all these years because I couldn't stand for my own daughter to know I'd been the one who cracked the foundation. She was quiet a while. Then she said the thing that undid me. She said she wasn't scared I'd get scammed. She was scared I'd disappear the way Grandpa disappeared, ashamed and broke and too proud to call anybody, dying in a kitchen with the phone across the room. She'd been trying to save me from a death she'd already watched once. The basement, the senior place, the folder. All of it was a girl who'd seen how these things end, trying to make sure it didn't end that way again. I'd been so busy feeling managed, I never once saw the fear under the managing. I didn't fix it with a speech. I told her I understood, and that I was still going to make my own choices, and that those 2 things could both be true. She didn't love that. She's still my daughter. She still worries, still texts me to ask if I took the morning pills, still thinks the heat will get me one of these days. But she stopped deciding things for me. She started asking. There's a whole world of difference between Dad, come home, and Dad, when are you coming to see the kids? And by the time she left, she'd crossed from the first one to the second, and that's not nothing. That's most of everything. I couldn't afford to fly back with her. That's the plain truth, and I won't pretty it up. The heart business had taken most of what I had left, and a ticket to Ohio was a real hardship now, not a small thing. She knew it. We didn't dress it up between us. She just said, "Come when you can," and meant it. And that was a better goodbye than I had any right to. Here's where I am, if you want the honest ledger and not a happy ending. I'm on pills for the rest of my life, and I take them, all of them, because Ada fills the little box and would come down here and shake me if I didn't. I live on a budget that has no give in it. The raft is nearly gone, and I know it. And I've made a kind of peace with the fact that the money isn't coming back. I'm not going to be rich again. I'm barely going to be comfortable. Some days the heat still beats me. Some days I miss my old kitchen so bad I could sit down in the street. Ida and I are still figuring it out, still arguing about money, still negotiating what her family can and can't ask of me. And it's real work. The kind two grown people do who both got left by the first person they trusted with everything. But I'm useful. That's the part I flew 8,000 miles and nearly died to find. And it turned out to be the cheapest thing here. I keep the learning center's wiring alive. I've taken on Lorna's nephew Jason, 18 and going nowhere fast, and I'm teaching him the trade, the meter, the fault, the two piles. Fixable and not fixable. And the boy's got hands. He'll be able to feed a family with this. I fix half the pumps and fans on my street, and I let people pay their share now, because Ada taught me the difference between helping a place and turning it into something that only takes. My coffee's on the balcony every morning, 1 cup, but the street's awake around it. Lorna hauling up her shutter, Nilo's engine somewhere close, Jason coming by early because he can't wait to get his hands on whatever we're pulling apart that day. It is not a silent kitchen with a second cup going cold. I earned the difference between those 2 mornings, and I earned it the hard way. The ring's still in the drawer by the bed. I don't wear it, and I haven't thrown it out, and I've stopped needing it to mean anything. It's just where it is now. And the ticket? I bought a new one last month. Round trip this time. Ohio and back. It took me most of a year to save for it, and I'll be eating rice for a while to cover it. But I'm going to see Tyler and Grace in the spring, and then I'm coming home here, to the hot little apartment and the people who notice when I'm late. That first ticket was a man running out of country with nowhere to land. This one I chose, both directions, with my eyes open. I lost the marriage. I lost the house. I lost most of the money, and a good piece of that was my own doing, and I lost the certainty that I knew how my life was going to go. The Philippines didn't hand any of it back. It didn't save me. I want to be clear about that, because there's a version of this told all wrong, where the sad old man flies to paradise and gets fixed. That's not what happened. What happened is, a place gave me room to be worth something to somebody again, and being missed turned out to be the thing I'd actually lost back in that silent kitchen long before I ever lost the money. I'm 64 now, still a little scared most days. But I'm not sitting in a chair waiting for the phone to ring anymore. Somebody's always at the door. And if you made it all the way here with me, thank you for sitting with an old man while he told it. If any piece of this moved you, do me that last favor. Like this video, subscribe so you don't miss the next story, and leave a comment telling me about somebody in your own life who started over when everyone said it was too late. I read every one of them, and I'll see you at the next one.